The wind hit Marcus hard as he sprinted down the sidewalk, feet pounding rhythmically against the cracked pavement of Maple Avenue. He wasn't running from anything, just clearing his head like he did most afternoons. AirPods in, volume low, just enough to feel the beat of Kendrick's voice guiding his pace. It had been a long day at school. Coach had canceled track practice and Marcus needed the run. He wore his black hoodie, same one he wore every other day, and his red Nikes, beat up but still quick. The neighborhood passed in blurs. Houses with sagging porches. A barking dog behind a rusted fence. The world faded into the background. Just him and the rhythm. Then it happened. The screech of tires. Sharp. Sudden. He looked up just as a police cruiser veered in front of him, blocking the sidewalk. "Hey! Stop! Hands where I can see them." Marcus stumbled, heart jumping into his throat. Another car skidded behind him. 2 officers were out before he could catch his breath. One pointed a gun. The other had his hand on a taser. "I said hands up. Don't move." His body froze. His arms instinctively lifted. "I didn't do anything." "Shut it. On your knees, now." Marcus's knees buckled on command. He could barely breathe. People were watching from porches behind curtains. A car slowed, then kept going. No one stepped in. One of the officers, a tall white guy with a buzz cut, stepped closer. The other, a younger black officer, looked hesitant but said nothing. "ID," the white officer barked. Marcus stammered, "It's in my pocket. I was just running." "Running from where? What did you do back there?" "Nothing. I swear. I just live." He didn't get to finish. The officer grabbed his arm, twisted it behind his back, and shoved him face first onto the pavement. The world flipped. Pain radiated through his shoulder. "Stop resisting." "I'm not." Marcus choked, gravel scraping his cheek. He could hear the rustling of the officer's radio. Words like suspicious individual, possible suspect, matching description. Nothing made sense. "You got anything on you? Weapons? Drugs?" "I got nothing," Marcus said into the ground. The younger cop knelt beside him. "We got a call. Black male. Black hoodie. Running." "That's me." Marcus spat. "That's all it takes?" The older cop laughed. "Don't get smart. You fit the damn profile." They patted him down roughly. Pulled out his phone, his student ID, his house key. That was it. The search took 5 minutes. The silence afterward stretched longer. Then came the worst part. The radio crackled again. "Cancel suspect ID. Real perp in custody 2 blocks away." The officers stood there for a moment. Buzzcut grunted. "You can go." "Seriously?" Marcus sat up, stunned. "You're free to go. No apology. No explanation. Just silence." His hands trembled as he stood, knees scraped, palms dirty. The younger officer wouldn't meet his eyes. The older one turned back to the cruiser. Marcus started walking. Slowly. Stiffly. He didn't run this time. He walked the 8 blocks home in silence. The world no longer blurred. It pressed in on him from every side. When he reached his porch, his mother was already waiting. "Marcus? What happened?" He looked at her, and the tears came fast, hot, unexpected. She wrapped him in her arms before he could speak. Inside, he sat on the couch while she cleaned his face. His palms were bleeding a little. She dabbed them gently with a wet cloth, her eyes scanning him for injuries. "They threw me on the ground, Ma," he said quietly. She paused. "Cops?" He nodded. Her hands went still. Then resumed, slower now. "What did they say?" "They said I matched a description." She clenched her jaw. "That again?" "I was just running." She didn't answer. Just sat beside him, held his hand. Later that night, Marcus posted a short video. No filters. No edits. Just him in his hoodie with the scratch still fresh on his face. "I was running today. Just running. I do it every afternoon." He paused, looked straight at the camera. "I matched a description. That's all it took." The video went viral within hours. Marcus didn't sleep much that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt the cold sidewalk on his face again. Heard the barked orders. "Don't move. Hands where I can see them." Over and over. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, phone buzzing beside him. By dawn, the video had over 80,000 views. Hundreds of comments. Most of them angry. Some supportive. Some not. By lunchtime the next day, it had passed 400,000. "Dude," his best friend Devin said as they sat under the tree by the lunch tables. "You're blowing up." Marcus stared at the screen. "You read these?" Devin asked. "Some." He didn't know what to feel. Part of him wanted to take it all down. Part of him wanted the world to see it, really see it. The pain. The injustice. The absurdity of it all. A few students came up to him in the hallway. That was real brave, man. I showed it to my mom, she cried. One girl said they had no right to do that to you. But then came the whispers. The looks. The boys on the football team who stopped talking when he passed. And Coach Hernandez who said nothing at all. By 7th period, the principal called him in. Mr. Eldridge sat behind his big desk, hands folded, face unreadable. Marcus, he said. I've seen your video. Marcus tensed. I understand something serious happened. Are you all right? Marcus nodded slowly. Do you need time off? A counselor. I just need people to care, Marcus said. There was a long pause. Eldridge leaned back, sighing. You've put the school in a difficult position. Marcus blinked. Excuse me. There's media interest. News vans outside. Phone calls. The district's involved. Because I told the truth? I'm not saying you're lying, Eldridge said quickly. But you have to understand, perception is complicated. Marcus stood. So is reality. Before Eldridge could respond, Marcus walked out. At home, his mom was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open. She looked tired. She looked like she hadn't stopped worrying since yesterday. There's a reporter asking for an interview, she said softly. From Atlanta. Big channel. I don't know if I want that, Marcus said. She nodded. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. But what if I don't say anything and they do it to someone else? His mom sighed and looked up at him. Then maybe you should speak. He agreed to one interview. Just one. They came to the house. Set up lights in the living room. Asked him questions like, how did it feel to have a gun pointed at you? What do you say to people who think the officers were just doing their job? What message do you want to send? He tried to answer honestly. Tried to keep his voice steady. My name is Marcus Taylor, he said at the end, looking into the lens. I'm 17. I run track. I read comic books. I help my mom with groceries. And apparently all it takes for me to be a threat is to be running while black. That clip got shared more than the original video. Somewhere around 1 million views, things changed. He started getting tagged in tweets by activists. People from across the country messaged him. A civil rights lawyer emailed his mom. A college professor from New York wanted to use his video in a classroom. The mayor's office released a statement. But still, no word from the police department. No apology. Nothing. 2 days later, a local protest was organized. Peaceful. Community-led. Come speak, a woman told him. People want to hear from you. He didn't want to be a symbol. He just wanted to be a kid again. To run and not feel afraid. But he went. Devin stood next to him at the community center steps. A crowd had gathered. Dozens of people holding signs. Justice for Marcus. Black Lives Matter. No right to run. The words echoed in the air. When Marcus stepped up to the mic, his hands shook. But his voice didn't. He told them everything. The run. The stop. The fear. The silence. And he said this wasn't the first time this happened. And I'm scared it won't be the last. Not to me. Not to my little cousin. Not to anyone who looks like me. The crowd was quiet. Then someone clapped. Then more. Soon it turned into a wave of applause, not wild or loud, but strong. Afterward, a woman in her 60s hugged him. My son went through the same thing in 1985, she whispered. Another man gave him a shirt with Marcus's face on it. It was surreal. Back at school, things stayed tense. A few teachers showed quiet support. Others avoided eye contact. One day in English class, Mr. Sims, the only black teacher in the school, asked if he wanted to share his writing. Marcus read a poem he had written. It wasn't polished. It wasn't pretty. But it was true. And when he finished, the room was silent. No one laughed. No one rolled their eyes. Just silence. Then Sims nodded slowly. Thank you. The days after the protest felt like a storm that wouldn't pass. Marcus struggled to find quiet in his mind, replaying the moments over and over, the sudden stop, the officers shouting, the guns aimed at him. The fear was raw and relentless, lingering beneath his skin like a wound that refused to heal. At school, his attention slipped away from lessons as his phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, news alerts, and interview requests. He hadn't wanted any of this attention, but silence was no longer an option. His story was no longer just his own, it had grown beyond that, into something bigger, something demanding change. One gray afternoon, Marcus stood in front of the police department. He had avoided this moment as long as he could, but his civil rights lawyer, Ms. Carter, insisted. You need to be there. Your presence gives this weight, she told him firmly. The walk through the building felt colder than the November air outside. The sterile walls echoed with footsteps as he was led to a conference room where a small group of officers waited, faces unreadable and impassive. Captain Reed, the man who had overseen the stop, sat at the head of the table, his expression tight. Marcus, the captain said, voice clipped and formal, we have reviewed the incident thoroughly. The officers followed procedure. Marcus's fists clenched, his anger simmering under the surface. Procedure? He repeated quietly, voice trembling. You pointed guns at me just because I was running? Because I'm black. A heavy silence filled the room. Captain Reed's eyes narrowed slightly. This is a complicated situation. Our officers acted on the information they had. Complicated doesn't mean right, Marcus said sharply. His lawyer stepped forward. We demand a formal apology for the aggression and a commitment to reform the training procedures. This cannot happen again. The captain sighed, weary. We will consider your demands. But Marcus could see the words were hollow. When he walked outside, a crowd of reporters greeted him. Their cameras flashed as he faced them, voice steady despite the turmoil inside. This is not just my story. It's the story of everyone stopped without cause who has felt the terror of being targeted because of the color of their skin. Back at school, the battle continued in quieter, more painful ways. Rumors spread fast. Some students whispered behind his back, calling him a troublemaker. Others avoided him entirely, as if his presence made them uncomfortable. One morning, Marcus opened his locker to find a folded note slipped inside. The words cut deep, go back to where you came from. His chest tightened. The note was more than paper, it was a reminder of the loneliness that had started to surround him. That evening, he told his mother about the note. She pulled him into a hug, holding him close. You're stronger than they think, she said softly. And you are not alone. At school, though, support was scarce. During lunch, Marcus noticed Coach Hernandez watching him from across the cafeteria. The coach said nothing and made no move to come over. The isolation weighed heavily on Marcus's heart. The week's assignment in English offered a small refuge, write a personal essay about an experience that changed you. Marcus poured his heart into it, describing the day he was stopped, the fear, the anger, the fragile hope for justice. He wrote about running, not just from officers, but from a system that seemed determined to chase him down and silence him. Handing in the essay felt like stepping onto thin ice, vulnerable and exposed. The next day, Mr. Sims pulled him aside after class. That was powerful, Marcus, the teacher said quietly. Your words matter. Don't ever doubt that. But Marcus knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and hard. The weeks that followed felt like a slow unraveling. Marcus's world became a tangle of whispers and sideways glances, punctuated by moments of quiet defiance. Each day at school was a balancing act, trying to keep his grades up while carrying the weight of unwanted attention and invisible hostility. The note in his locker was only the beginning. More appeared, some slipped into his backpack, others left taped to his bedroom window at home. They weren't always cruel words, sometimes they were threats thinly veiled, meant to scare him into silence. One afternoon, as Marcus walked down the crowded hallway, a group of boys from the football team blocked his path. Their faces were hard, voices low but full of menace. You think you're some kind of hero, huh? One sneered. Marcus squared his shoulders. I'm just standing up for what's right. A shove came from the side. The corridor seemed to close in around him, the jeers growing louder. Before things could spiral, a teacher appeared and broke up the confrontation. Marcus felt the adrenaline draining, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. That night, he sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the ceiling. His mother knocked softly and sat beside him. You're stronger than this, she said again, but Marcus didn't feel it. He felt tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of being watched, judged, and attacked for simply existing. The tension crept into his home life as well. His father, once a steady source of support, had grown quieter, his own frustrations spilling out in sharp words during family dinners. The racial climate outside the house had seeped in, creating cracks in the foundation that once felt unshakable. One evening, Marcus's mother caught him scrolling through social media, eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion. He hesitated before showing her the latest video that had gone viral, footage of the stop, captured by a bystander. The video was raw, showing the fear on Marcus's face, the officers shouting the moment he was forced to the ground. It's everywhere now, Marcus whispered. I can't escape it. His mother wrapped her arms around him. You're not alone, Marcus. People are listening. This is bigger than us. At school, Marcus found an unexpected ally in Ms. Jenkins, the history teacher. She invited him to join the student council, encouraging him to speak out and organize a peaceful assembly to raise awareness about racial profiling and police brutality. The idea sparked something in Marcus, a purpose beyond pain. With Ms. Jenkins's guidance, he began drafting a plan for a school-wide event. Flyers were made, announcements shared quietly but deliberately. The day the assembly arrived, cold and gray like so many before it. The gymnasium filled with students, teachers, and some parents. Marcus stepped to the podium, nerves twisting his stomach but his voice clear. "We all deserve to feel safe," he began. "Not just in the school, but everywhere. We need to stand together against injustice." As he spoke, he scanned the room, catching glimpses of faces, some skeptical, some supportive. He saw the coach in the back, arms crossed, and the principal nodding slowly. It was a start. Afterward, a handful of students approached Marcus, offering quiet words of support. It wasn't the flood of acceptance he had hoped for, but it was enough to keep going. That night, as he lay in bed, Marcus felt a fragile thread of hope. The path ahead was uncertain and heavy with challenges, but he was no longer running alone. The weeks after the assembly brought a cautious change. Marcus felt the weight of his role as a reluctant leader settling on his shoulders. His days were filled with meetings, calls, and planning sessions. The student council formed a committee focused on social justice issues, and Marcus found himself at the center, tasked with turning ideas into action. But the challenges multiplied. At school, some teachers who had been quiet before began to speak out more openly, supporting the cause. Others remained distant, unwilling to get involved. The principal agreed to set up a series of workshops on racial bias and police-community relations, but only after persistent pressure. Meanwhile, the hostility Marcus faced outside school grew more intense. On his way home one afternoon, two men in a pickup truck slowed down beside him. One shouted a racial slur, and the other flipped him off before they sped away. Marcus's heart hammered in his chest as he hurried the last block home. Inside, the safety of his house felt fragile, a thin barrier against the anger that seemed to swirl everywhere. His parents' relationship became strained. Arguments erupted over how to handle the situation, his father pushing for caution, his mother insisting on speaking out louder. Marcus often found himself caught in the middle, feeling responsible for holding the family together while navigating his own fears. One night, Marcus's father sat him down. "Son, I know you want to fight this," he said quietly. "But sometimes staying alive means knowing when to walk away." Marcus looked at him, frustrated and confused. "How can I walk away from something that won't let me?" His father sighed, defeated. "I don't have answers. Just be careful." The distance between them grew, a silence heavier than words. At school, the committee worked tirelessly to prepare for a community forum inviting police officers, local leaders, and residents to discuss the issues. Marcus rehearsed his speech over and over, determined to use his voice for change. The night of the forum arrived with an air of tension. The town hall was packed, the seats filled with people from every walk of life. Marcus sat backstage, heart pounding, waiting for his turn. When his name was called, he stepped forward into the spotlight. "I stand here not just for myself," he began, voice steady despite the knots inside, "but for everyone who has ever felt unsafe in their own neighborhood because of the color of their skin." He spoke about fear, about the stop that changed his life, about the quiet pain of everyday discrimination. His words echoed through the room, stirring murmurs and nods. Afterward, the floor opened to questions and comments, some supportive, others defensive. Marcus faced interruptions, skepticism, and even hostility from a few voices in the crowd. But he held firm. A police officer stood up, acknowledging the pain and fear, promising to work on rebuilding trust. It was imperfect, messy, but it was a start. Later, as Marcus left the building, a woman approached him. She was older, with kind eyes. "You're brave," she said simply. "Don't ever lose that." That night, Marcus felt something fragile begin to grow inside, a sense that maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference. The days that followed the forum were a mix of exhaustion and cautious optimism. Marcus woke every morning with a restless energy, his mind tangled in plans and worries alike. The forum had opened doors, but it had also brought him into the harsh spotlight. Some students praised him, but others whispered behind his back. Social media became a battlefield, comments flooded in, some supportive, many hateful. One evening, scrolling through his phone in the dim light of his room, Marcus read messages that cut deep. Anonymous accounts called him names, accused him of stirring trouble, even threatened him with violence. He swallowed the lump in his throat and locked his phone away. His mother found him later sitting silently, staring at the ceiling. "You're stronger than this, Marcus," she said, sitting beside him, but he barely nodded. At school, the atmosphere shifted. While some teachers openly backed Marcus's cause, others quietly distanced themselves. The football coach, who had once been indifferent, now avoided eye contact. The tension was palpable in classrooms, hallways, even in the cafeteria. Marcus felt the weight of every stare, every whispered word. One afternoon, during lunch, a group of boys circled him, their voices low but threatening. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're just a troublemaker," one sneered. Marcus stood his ground. "I'm standing up for what's right." The boy pushed him hard against a table. The cafeteria erupted in murmurs, but before it escalated, a teacher intervened. Marcus's heart pounded as he walked away, but a new determination began to burn within him. That night, he confided in his mother. "I can't keep doing this alone," he said, voice breaking. She took his hand. "You don't have to. We'll find help." The next day, Marcus met with Ms. Jenkins, who suggested reaching out to local civil rights groups. Together, they contacted a community organizer named Linda, who offered resources and support. With Linda's help, Marcus began speaking at neighborhood meetings and local churches. His story resonated beyond school walls. People listened, shared their own experiences, and slowly a network of support formed around him. Still, the dangers remained real. One evening, as Marcus walked home, he noticed a car following him. Panic surged, but he kept calm, turning corners and walking toward crowded areas. The car eventually sped off, but the fear lingered. Inside his house, the tension between his parents worsened. His father, overwhelmed and silent, retreated into himself. His mother, frustrated but steadfast, became Marcus's pillar. "You're doing what's right," she told him one night, wiping tears from his face. "No matter what anyone says." School administrators finally agreed to introduce mandatory training on racial bias for staff and students, a small but meaningful victory. Marcus helped design the program, sharing his story and encouraging open dialogue. Despite progress, the nights were hardest. Marcus lay awake, replaying memories of the stop, the fear, the shame. Sometimes tears came without warning. He missed the days when he could just be a kid. One afternoon, as he sat in the library, a girl named Kayla approached him. "I saw what you did," she said quietly. "You're brave. I want to help." They began working together, organizing workshops and art projects focused on racial justice. Kayla's friendship brought a warmth Marcus hadn't felt in months. The journey was far from over. But surrounded by allies, Marcus found a flicker of hope, a fragile promise that change was possible, one step at a time. The months after the forum blurred together in a whirlwind of speeches, meetings, and protests. Marcus was no longer just a kid trying to survive his daily life. He had become a symbol, whether he wanted to or not. His face appeared on local news broadcasts, community flyers, and social media pages dedicated to justice and equality. Some called him a hero, others labeled him a troublemaker. But Marcus barely had time to think about labels. His world was spinning faster than ever, and the weight on his shoulders was crushing. Each morning, he woke with a tightness in his chest, wondering what new challenge awaited him. The fear of retaliation was constant, but Marcus refused to let it silence him. His mother watched him with quiet pride but also with growing concern. The emotional toll was visible in the lines around his eyes and the way he sometimes flinched at sudden noises. One cold afternoon, as Marcus sat on the worn-out couch in their living room, his phone buzzed relentlessly. He picked it up, eyes scanning the screen until they stopped at a message that made his blood run cold. It was a photo, a shattered window at their home, the glass scattered across the porch like shards of broken trust. Below the image was a chilling caption, "We're watching you. Stay quiet." His mother gasped when she saw the message, clutching the phone as if it might burn her fingers. "We have to call the police," she whispered, voice trembling with fear. Marcus shook his head, frustration and dread knotting in his stomach. "What good would that do? The police didn't protect me before. They won't protect us now." His father, who had remained mostly silent these past weeks, suddenly spoke with a hardness Marcus rarely heard. "We can't live like this. We have to leave. Start over somewhere else." The idea of leaving everything Marcus knew, the neighborhood, his friends, the school, felt like a betrayal. His whole fight had been to claim a place here, to demand respect where he lived. "I won't run away," Marcus said firmly, his voice steady but filled with pain. "Not now. Not ever." The tension at home grew unbearable. Arguments erupted, voices raised in frustration and exhaustion. Marcus tried to protect his little sister Ava, but she was old enough to sense the storm brewing beneath their roof. One evening, as Marcus sat quietly on the stairs, Ava came up beside him and asked in a soft voice, "Will they ever stop, Marcus? Will this ever end?" He didn't have an answer. Instead, he pulled her close. "I don't know, Ava, but I promise you I'm not giving up." School was no sanctuary. The racial bias workshops had opened some eyes, but for every student who joined their cause, there were others who grew more hostile. Flyers with hateful messages appeared overnight on lockers. Racist graffiti was spray-painted on the bathroom walls and in the hallways. Security cameras were installed and police officers patrolled the campus, turning what was once a place of learning into a tense battleground. Despite the danger, Marcus and Kayla refused to back down. They organized rallies and peaceful protests, drawing crowds that sometimes swelled into hundreds. The energy at these events was electric, voices chanting, fists raised, signs held high. Marcus's speeches became more confident, his message sharper. But the backlash was vicious. One night, after a particularly passionate protest, Marcus and Kayla walked home under the orange glow of streetlights. The quiet was deceptive. Suddenly, a car slowed behind them, tires crunching on gravel. Marcus's heart hammered as the vehicle matched their pace. Without warning, the car stopped and 4 men stepped out, blocking the sidewalk. Their faces were hard, eyes cold. "What do you want?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the fear pooling in his stomach. One man stepped forward, sneering. "You think you're the voice of the city? You're nothing but a punk stirring trouble." Kayla grabbed Marcus's arm tightly. "Let's go," she whispered urgently. Marcus shook his head, planting his feet firmly. "We want justice," he said, his voice low but resolute. "Not fear." The men laughed, a harsh, bitter sound, then stepped back into their car and sped away. But the threat hung heavy in the night air. That night, Marcus sat alone on the porch steps, the cool breeze brushing against his face. His thoughts spiraled, fear, anger, hope, and exhaustion tangled inside him. He stared at the stars, trying to find a sign, something steady to hold onto. His mother's words echoed in his mind, no matter what anyone says. He whispered to the dark sky, "I won't stop." Days turned into weeks. Marcus's father's resolve to move away softened as he saw the impact Marcus was making. The family began to heal in small ways. Ava laughed more often, and even his father started attending some of the community meetings. Marcus's school announced that they would implement a new policy addressing racial discrimination inspired by the work Marcus and his peers had done. It was a small victory, but a step forward. Through it all, Kayla remained by his side, a steady friend and partner in the fight. Their bond grew deeper, built on shared struggles and quiet moments. One afternoon, while preparing for another presentation, Kayla caught Marcus's eye. "You're not alone," she said simply. And for the first time in a long while, Marcus believed it. The night after the confrontation, Marcus lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His mind replayed the moment over and over, the cold eyes of the men, the way their words sliced through the quiet air. He could still feel the tension in his muscles, the pounding of his heart like a drum signaling an incoming storm. The fear wasn't new, but tonight it felt heavier, like a weight pressing down on his chest. In the silence, his phone vibrated. A message from Kayla lit up the screen. "You okay?" "I'm here. Always." He typed back slowly, the words barely escaping his fingers. "I'm scared." The reply was instant. "That's okay. Scared means you care. Don't let them win." Marcus closed his eyes and let the message wash over him. In that moment, the fear softened just a little, replaced by a flicker of determination. The next morning, the community rallied stronger than ever. News of the threat spread quickly, sparking outrage and support. Flyers with messages like "Stand with Marcus" and "Justice for All" appeared across the city, and more people joined the movement. Neighbors Marcus had barely known before came forward to offer help, meals, rides, and words of encouragement. But the fight was far from over. At school, tensions boiled over during a heated assembly. Students packed the gymnasium, voices loud, emotions raw. Marcus stood at the podium, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on him. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "We are more than the hate they try to put on us," he said, voice strong. "We have the power to change this. But it starts with us. With how we see each other. With how we stand up not just for ourselves, but for everyone who's been pushed down." The applause was thunderous. For a moment, hope bloomed in the room like a fragile flower. Outside, however, the world was harsher. That same night, Marcus's family received another threat, this time a broken mailbox and a note that simply read, "Leave or suffer the consequences." His mother's hands trembled as she showed the note to Marcus. "They're trying to scare us," she said softly. "But we won't let them." Marcus felt the familiar mix of fear and resolve tighten inside him. He thought of Ava, her innocent face filled with trust, and his mother's tired eyes. The stakes had never been higher. One evening, as Marcus and Kayla prepared for a march downtown, Marcus's father pulled him aside. "Son," he said quietly, "I know you want to fight. But you have to be careful. Not just for yourself, but for your family." Marcus nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I will. I promise." The march was a sea of voices and signs, footsteps pounding the pavement in rhythm. Marcus led the crowd, his voice rising with theirs, calling for justice and equality. For every chant, for every fist raised, Marcus felt a spark of power, a reminder that change was possible. But the night ended in chaos. As the crowd dispersed, a group of masked men appeared, throwing bottles and shouting slurs. Marcus and Kayla barely escaped the fray, hearts racing, adrenaline surging. The violence was a stark reminder of the hatred they faced, but also their courage to stand tall despite it. Days later, the city council announced plans for a new task force to address hate crimes and police reform. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was progress. Marcus felt the slow burn of hope in his chest, mingled with the scars of what they had endured. Through it all, Marcus learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting in spite of it. And in that truth, he found his strength. The days that followed the march were a mixture of fragile hope and relentless struggle. Marcus woke each morning to a city still divided, to whispers of protests and counter-protests, and to the heavy feeling that the battle was far from over. At school, things became more complicated. Some students who once ignored Marcus now eyed him with suspicion. Others whispered behind his back, fueled by rumors and fear. Even some teachers seemed hesitant, unsure of how to address the tension without making it worse. But Kayla stood by him, unwavering. "Don't let them get inside your head," she said firmly one afternoon as they sat under a tree in the school courtyard. "They want to break you down, make you feel alone. But you're not." Marcus nodded, grateful for her presence. It was in these moments, simple, quiet, that he found the strength to keep going. At home, his mother tried to keep things normal, cooking meals and helping Ava with her homework, but the strain was visible. His father spent long hours at work, returning tired but always with a word of encouragement. One evening, as Marcus sat at the kitchen table, his mother joined him, placing a warm cup of tea in front of him. "You're carrying a heavy load," she said gently. "But remember, it's okay to lean on those who love you." Her words struck a chord. Marcus realized he had been trying to carry everything alone, the fear, the anger, the hope. The next day, a new letter arrived, this time addressed directly to Marcus. It was cruel and hateful, full of threats and slurs. Instead of sinking into despair, Marcus showed it to the school counselor. Together, they reported it to the authorities and started a campaign to educate students about hate and empathy. Slowly, things began to shift. The school organized workshops and students formed groups to support one another. Marcus found himself speaking at events, sharing his story not just as a victim but as someone fighting back. But the darkest moment came unexpectedly. Late one night, Marcus heard a loud crash outside his window. Rushing outside, he found the family car vandalized, windows smashed, tires slashed. The message was clear, the hate was still very much alive. The community rallied again, but Marcus felt the sting deeply. He lay awake, questioning how much more they could endure. Yet, through the pain, one thing remained clear: Marcus was no longer invisible. His story, his struggle, had sparked something real. In that growing light, he found a fragile but unbreakable resolve to keep fighting, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced. The following weeks stretched endlessly, each day blending into the next with a mixture of exhaustion and determination. Marcus woke to the cold light of dawn and fell asleep to the distant sounds of sirens and unrest. The city's tension hung in the air like a thick fog, heavy, suffocating, yet impossible to ignore. At school, the ripple effects of the incident continued. While some students rallied behind Marcus, others remained cold or openly hostile. Hallway whispers turned to muttered threats. His friends stuck close, but Marcus noticed the subtle shifts, the avoidance of eye contact, the careful silence from people who once smiled freely. One afternoon, as Marcus and Kayla sat in the crowded cafeteria, a group of boys from a different clique approached. Their leader sneered, voice low and mocking. "Still playing the victim, huh? Maybe you should just stay out of our way." Kayla's eyes flashed with quiet fire. "You don't scare us," she said firmly. The boys exchanged looks but didn't escalate, not today. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and unease. The threat lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. Back home, the atmosphere was tense but resilient. Marcus's mother, always the anchor, insisted on family dinners even when exhaustion weighed heavy on her shoulders. Their conversations were quiet but honest. "You're stronger than you know," she told him one night as they sat at the worn kitchen table, the smell of fresh cornbread filling the room. "I just want this to end," Marcus admitted, voice barely above a whisper. His father nodded from his chair, eyes tired but steady. "We all do, son. But sometimes the hardest fights are the ones that lead to change." Marcus thought about the vandalized car, the broken windows, the hateful notes. They weren't just attacks on property or words on paper. They were attacks on his family, on the fragile sense of safety they had left. He began attending community meetings, sharing his story in front of strangers, each time feeling the weight of their gazes, some filled with empathy, others with judgment. The process was draining but necessary. One evening, Marcus was invited to speak at a local church, a place he had rarely visited before. The room was packed, a sea of faces from different backgrounds, all gathered to listen. When Marcus stepped up to the microphone, his voice trembled at first. "I never thought I'd be standing here like this," he began. "I'm just a kid from around here. But what happened to me, it's not just about me. It's about all of us who face fear, hate, and injustice every day." He paused, looking out at the crowd. "We need to believe that change is possible. But it starts with us, with standing up, speaking out, and refusing to be silent." The applause was heartfelt, echoing through the high ceilings. Afterwards, a woman approached Marcus, her eyes moist. "Thank you," she said simply. "You've given me hope." That night, Marcus felt a spark, fragile, yes, but alive. Yet the danger remained real. Late one night, a loud banging shook the front door of the family home. Marcus's heart raced as his mother peered through the peephole, then locked the door quickly. They didn't know who it was, but the message was clear: they were being watched, threatened. Sleep became elusive. Every creak in the house, every passing car felt like a potential threat. Still, Marcus refused to give in to fear. Instead, he channeled his anxiety into writing, journaling late into the night, pouring his feelings onto paper. Words became a refuge, a way to make sense of the chaos. His writing spoke of pain and hope, of anger and resilience, of a world he dreamed could be better. As the community continued to rally, local news outlets began covering the story, giving Marcus a wider platform. Interviews followed, each one a chance to shed light on the realities of racial injustice. With each telling, Marcus grew stronger, his voice clearer. He was no longer just a victim, he was a young man determined to forge a path toward change. But with every step forward, the shadows loomed. One afternoon, Marcus received a call from the police. They had arrested a suspect, one of the men involved in the threats. Relief and apprehension battled inside him. Justice was not guaranteed, but it was a start. That evening, the family gathered in the living room, the news playing softly in the background. His mother reached over, squeezing his hand. "No matter what happens, we stand together," she said firmly. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle deep inside him. The road ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges, but he knew one thing for sure: he would not walk it alone. The days following the arrest were a strange mixture of relief and unease. Marcus could finally breathe a little easier, but he knew the fight was far from over. The court case loomed ahead like a shadow, a test not just of the law but of truth itself. His mind was heavy with questions. Would justice truly be served? Would his words be enough to counter the deep currents of prejudice? At school, the tension still hung thick. Some students whispered behind his back, others stared openly, and a few avoided him altogether. Yet there were those who stood firmly by his side, friends who believed in his courage and the cause he represented. Kayla was always there, unwavering. One afternoon, she caught him after class. "We're not letting them win, Marcus. No matter what happens, we stand together." Her words were a lifeline. He nodded, the weight in his chest easing, if only slightly. Marcus threw himself into preparing for the trial. He met with lawyers, recounted every detail, and faced uncomfortable questions that dredged up pain and fear. But each time he spoke, he felt a growing strength, the power of owning his story, refusing to be silenced. In the quiet moments at home, his mother held him close, whispering reassurance. "You're brave beyond measure," she said softly. "And you're not alone." But as the court date approached, the community's support was met with resistance. Protests erupted, some peaceful, others angry and volatile. The city became a battleground of conflicting voices, and Marcus found himself caught in the storm. One evening, as he walked home with Kayla, a group of men blocked their path. Their faces were hard, their intentions clear. Fear tightened in Marcus's throat, but he stood tall. "We're not afraid," Kayla said, stepping beside him. The men sneered but didn't advance. The moment was tense, charged with the possibility of violence, before they finally dispersed. That night, Marcus lay awake, the adrenaline still pulsing through his veins. "This isn't just about me," he thought. "It's about every kid who's been told they don't belong." The trial was long and exhausting. Witnesses came and went, voices clashed, and the weight of history pressed down in the courtroom. Marcus spoke with a clarity born from pain and hope, every word a challenge to the biases entrenched in the system. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered, some shouting for justice, others for silence. The world seemed to hold its breath. When the verdict finally came, Marcus felt his heart hammer in his chest. The jury's decision was more than a legal outcome, it was a statement. Guilty. A wave of emotion crashed over him, relief, sorrow, and a cautious hope. But even in victory, the scars remained. Marcus knew that the true work was just beginning, to heal, to rebuild, and to fight for a future where stories like his would no longer be necessary. He stood outside the courthouse, the sun setting behind the skyline, casting long shadows over the city. His mother joined him, her eyes filled with tears. "We made it through," she said. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of everything, the pain, the struggle, the hard-won hope settle into a quiet resolve. "We did," he whispered. "But there's still so much to do." The days after the verdict were filled with a complex swirl of emotions. Relief was there, of course, but so was a lingering exhaustion that settled deep in Marcus's bones. The courtroom victory had been important, but the fight against the undercurrents of racism in his town was far from over. He felt a strange disconnect, as if the world was moving on while parts of him remained tangled in the dark moments of those past weeks. At school, the atmosphere shifted in subtle ways. Some classmates offered quiet nods of respect, while others remained distant, their eyes averted. The hallways, once filled with uneasy whispers, now carried a cautious curiosity. Marcus was aware that many saw him as a symbol, something larger than just a kid who had faced injustice. The weight of that role was heavy and sometimes suffocating. Kayla stayed by his side, her presence steady like a lighthouse in a stormy sea. "You don't have to carry this alone," she said one afternoon as they sat beneath the old oak tree on campus. Marcus looked at her, grateful but unsure. "I don't know how to be anything else," he admitted quietly. She reached out, squeezing his hand. "You're allowed to be scared. You're allowed to be tired. But you're not alone." Those words echoed in his mind during the long nights that followed. Sleep was elusive, his thoughts drifting between hope and despair. He found himself replaying moments, both the painful and the victorious, like scenes from a movie he couldn't pause. Meanwhile, news of the case had spread beyond their town. Local activists reached out, offering support and urging Marcus to speak publicly about his experience. At first, he hesitated, unsure if he was ready to bear that responsibility. But then he remembered the faces of other kids who had suffered in silence, the ones who didn't have a voice. One evening, in a small community hall filled with people of all ages and backgrounds, Marcus stood before the crowd. His voice trembled at first, but as he spoke, a quiet power grew within him. "This isn't just my story," he said. "It's the story of so many who live in fear every day because of the color of their skin. We deserve better. We deserve to be heard." The applause was tentative but genuine. He looked out at the faces, seeing hope flicker in their eyes. In that moment, Marcus felt a shift, a step towards something new. But the road ahead was not without obstacles. Late one night, as he walked home alone, a car slowed beside him. The driver's face was obscured by shadows. "You think this changes anything?" a voice sneered. Marcus's heart pounded. He didn't answer. The car sped away, leaving behind a chilling reminder the fight was far from over. Back at home, Marcus's mother wrapped him in a fierce hug. "We'll face it together," she promised. Despite the threats and the weariness, Marcus knew she was right. He was no longer just a boy caught in the currents of injustice. He was becoming a voice, a beacon for change. The weeks that followed turned Marcus's world upside down. The media attention brought both allies and enemies into sharper focus. Reporters knocked on the door, eager for interviews. Some stories painted Marcus as a hero, while others tried to question his motives, stirring old prejudices. His family tried to shield him, but there was only so much they could do. His mother's eyes grew heavy with worry, and his father's quiet pride was tinged with frustration over the slow pace of change. At school, the weight of being a symbol sometimes felt unbearable. Teachers offered words of encouragement, but Marcus noticed subtle shifts in the hallways, teachers avoiding certain topics, classmates whispering behind closed doors. Racism was a quiet poison that seeped through cracks, not always visible but deeply felt. One afternoon, Marcus met with a group of students who had formed a small activist club inspired by his story. They talked about protests, community meetings, and ways to bring awareness. Marcus listened, his heart swelling with cautious hope. "We can't let this die down," he said. "Change doesn't come from silence." The group nodded, their eyes shining with determination. But the challenges mounted. One evening, Marcus found threatening notes slipped under his door. The words were cruel, meant to intimidate, to shake his resolve. Fear crept back like a shadow. Yet Marcus refused to back down. He began journaling, pouring his fears and hopes onto paper. Writing became a refuge, a way to process the chaos inside. In those pages, he wrote about his dreams, a world where no child lived in fear of the color of their skin, where justice was blind and fair. He wrote about the pain of being misunderstood and the fierce desire to be seen for who he truly was. His voice grew stronger. At a city council meeting, Marcus stood before the room filled with officials and citizens. His speech was measured, powerful. "We are not just statistics," he declared. "We are people with stories, with hopes, with rights. It's time for change, real change." The room was silent for a moment, then erupted in applause from some corners while others remained cold and distant. Afterwards, a council member approached him. "You're brave, Marcus. Keep pushing. The words gave Marcus a spark of hope. But not everyone welcomed his courage. At school, tensions flared. One day, a group of students confronted Marcus, their voices harsh and accusing. "You're stirring trouble," one sneered. Marcus met their gaze steady. "I'm speaking truth," he replied. The confrontation didn't escalate, but the undercurrent of hostility was clear. Still, Marcus held on to his purpose. He knew that the road ahead would be long, filled with setbacks and pain. But in every step there was progress, in every voice raised, in every story told, a seed of change was planted. The months rolled on, each day weaving a tapestry of quiet battles and small victories. Marcus felt the weight of every step, the heavy burden of expectation, the sting of hostility, and the fragile hope that flickered like a candle in the dark. At school, things grew more complicated. His teachers tried to keep peace, but whispers followed him down the halls. Some students avoided him, others watched with thinly veiled suspicion. The racial divide in the community was a wound that hadn't healed, and Marcus was painfully aware of it every time he walked through the doors. One day, during lunch, a group of students cornered him in the cafeteria. Their tone was mocking, their words sharp. "Why don't you just stop causing trouble?" one said, folding his arms. Marcus's eyes met theirs, steady and calm. "This isn't trouble. It's truth," he answered quietly. The tension was thick, but no fists were thrown. Marcus walked away, heart pounding, knowing that silence wasn't an option. At home, the atmosphere was a mix of love and tension. His mother held him close some nights, whispering words of comfort. His father, though proud, struggled with his own frustrations. The family was pulled tight by the strain of living under a cloud of fear and hope. Marcus began speaking more at community events, sharing his story with growing confidence. His words resonated with others, parents, teenagers, elders, all yearning for a change that seemed just out of reach. But one evening, as he returned from a meeting, a group of men blocked his path. Their faces were harsh, their intentions clear. Threats hung in the air like a storm ready to break. "You don't belong here," one growled. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. Fear surged, but so did something stronger, defiance. "I belong wherever I choose," he said firmly. The men hesitated, then dispersed into the night. That night, Marcus lay awake, thoughts swirling. The world was dangerous, unfair, but he was determined. This was bigger than fear. It was about justice, dignity, and the right to live without hate. With each challenge, Marcus grew, not just as a young man, but as a beacon for his community. The path was harsh, the fight relentless, but in the quiet moments, he found strength in his voice, his family, and the people who stood beside him. Marcus stood before the crowd one last time. The room was packed, faces eager, tired, hopeful. He felt their eyes on him, waiting for words that could carry them forward. He took a deep breath and began. "This fight isn't just mine. It belongs to all of us. To every person who's ever felt invisible, unheard, or unsafe because of the color of their skin. We are more than the labels they put on us. We are human. We are worthy." His voice trembled, but he pushed through, feeling the power of the moment. "We faced hatred and silence. But today we choose to speak, to stand, to demand change." Tears welled up in his mother's eyes, and his father nodded, pride shining through the weariness. Afterwards, as the crowd dispersed, an older woman approached Marcus. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Your courage has sparked something. Keep going. You're not alone." Marcus nodded, feeling a surge of strength. He knew the road ahead would still be hard, the system slow to change, hearts slow to open. But now he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was carrying the hopes of his community, the voices of those silenced for too long. That night, Marcus sat by his window, looking out over the city lights. The world was far from perfect, but inside him burned a fire of resilience, hope, and determination. He whispered to the night, "This is just the beginning.